Hey there, lovely people. It's Sammi again. I'm here for a Writer's Tip Tuesday. More of like a lesson of words and how to use them when you're talking about your story or other people's stories. But today I want to talk about the difference between a story that's a retelling and a story that takes inspiration from another story. So these are very, very close siblings when it comes to writing stories. Having a story that is clearly influenced by another story is something that a lot of authors will do. For example, like this weekend I talked about A Court of Thorns and Roses, and in that book it has some similarities with Beauty and the Beast. I talked a little bit about why I thought that it shouldn't be called a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what I personally believe a retelling is in today's community versus a story that takes inspiration from another story. So we'll start with the definition of what a retelling is. According to Merriam-Webster, it is a new version of a story, which could mean literally anything. If you think about it, every single story has already been told. Everything. Everything is a copy of something else, whether we want it to be or not. There are so many movies and books and plays that just follow Shakespeare's already tried and tested plot structure. Then there's, of course, all of these retellings of Disney stories, classic Disney stories, and classic Disney stories are all mostly retellings of old fairy tales, so on and so forth. There is no such thing as a new story anymore. Unfortunately, that's just the world we live in. People have been talking to each other and telling stories for too long for us to be able to have any individuality in the world of storytelling. Now, there are a couple of other definitions from other defining sites, like Oxford Dictionary describes a retelling as to tell a story again or differently. And then dictionary.com says it is a new, often updated or retranslated version of a story. Differently told and updated, new. Those are the things that really classify something as a retelling rather than just telling the same story. But it's a really fine line to walk when you can say something is a retelling of one thing versus not a retelling of another thing. Let's take The Lion King, for example. A lot of people say, and this was actually a reference that was made in my junior year English class in high school, was that The Lion King is a retelling of Shakespeare's Hamlet, which I had believed for the entire time. Since I had been told it, I believed it so fully, and then I saw a video essay talking about a Japanese animation film called Kimba the White Lion, which has almost every single aspect of The Lion King, and it's about a lion, and the similarities there are so much closer than with Hamlet, because Hamlet is a tragedy and The Lion King is a kids movie. So, is The Lion King a retelling of Hamlet, or is it a retelling of Kimba the White Lion? Do they steal the story from Hamlet and twist it to become something new, or do they completely alter the visuals of Kimba the White Lion and say that it is a new platform? Everything's a retelling. Every story has some aspect of another story in it. If you're currently reading Hamlet and then somebody says, let's watch The Lion King, you're going to draw the similarities. You're going to see that. But if you've seen Kimba the White Lion and then you go and you see The Lion King afterwards, you may go, that's weird. Simba is really similar to Kimba the White Lion. That's kind of crazy. So it really just depends on the reader's knowledge of the story that they're encountering, the knowledge of the story that is being retold or drawing inspiration from. Being able to say that something is a retelling is way too broad of a term, because everything is a little bit of a retelling. Sorry to discourage you if you thought you had an original idea. I'm sure somebody's already written it, but yours is unique because of how you're going to do it. The way that I see it is that if you're going to call your story a retelling of another story, it better be a retelling. Examples of this would be a story that follows Belle as she goes to a castle where there is a man who's been cursed into a beast, and it's set in 2024. But it's the same story, it's just a different setting. Or like Madeline Miller's Circe, which is an amazing example of a retelling. It takes the Greek myth of Circe and retells it from a different perspective. It takes this myth that is told from the perspective of men, pretty much, and tells it from the perspective of a self-supportive, strong woman, which is amazing. It's the same story, she does the same things, but we get a different viewpoint on it. Different small factors that change the story enough that people would want to see it again. Another one would be the new Twilight book. I don't know the name of it, forgive me. The one that's just Twilight, but retold from Edward's perspective. I haven't read it. I know some people who have. That's a retelling. It's the same story, but from a different perspective. The same things happen. It doesn't alter the plot or the characters or the development. Readers expect something specific from a story that is advertised as a retelling. They expect to know what's going to happen. They want to see what the twists are going to be. They want to know what kind of differences your take on it will be. They want to have the same joy, pain, suffering, have laughter, etc. that came from the first story. If there's a story that's really close to a reader's heart and they just want the ability to read it again for the first time, having a retelling of that can give them that experience where they kind of know what's going to happen, but also something different could happen. Readers expect a certain level of authenticity to the original story when they get a retelling. So if you advertise a story that has taken some inspiration from another story, like, I'll just continue using ACOTAR because that's in my head. Like, if you're talking about ACOTAR and you're like, this book has a curse that's similar to Beauty and the Beast, and it has a girl who doesn't like the prince who is cursed, and then they fall in love. Those are pretty much the only similarities that that story has to Beauty and the Beast. I would not call it a retelling because I would hate to cause people to be upset for not being able to have the story that they expected, have the character development that they expected, because it's not a retelling. It's a unique new story that took some elements from another story and built off of that and created a new entire story that other people can then take elements from and build off of. That's how we progress as storytellers. We just keep picking and choosing little bits of what we know from other stories and putting them together in our own. That's the hard part of writing, is putting them together in our own. And that's why it's amazing to take influence from other stories, but you have to be able to reconstruct and make them individual stories. All right, so let's jump back to Circe right quick. So, Circe is a Greek mythology character. Her story is told in Greek mythology. We know about her because of the things that were written down from Greek mythology, etc. It's a retelling because of the perspective change. I wouldn't call Percy Jackson a retelling of Greek adventures. While there are a lot of elements that are taken from Greek mythology stories that we know of, where Percy goes on these adventures, these quests that have something to do with a previously told story, like for example, the book where they go into the labyrinth. This takes a whole lot of its cues from the original myth of the labyrinth, with the girl who had allowed you to see how to get through because of her bracelet and all of that stuff. I'm not well versed in it. I just know it because it's directly referenced in the book. But they take a lot of their cues on how to achieve their quest, how to succeed and get what they need, because they know the previous stories and they follow the beats from the previous stories. But it's not a retelling because it's a totally different aspect, totally different world, totally different characters, totally different premise, totally different motives. It's all completely different, but it takes the same beats because it's a drawing inspiration. So I would say that it's very much a balance to make when you are deciding between doing a retelling or deciding between taking inspiration from another story. I would say if you are not using the same characters and the same direct plot arc, the same character development, something mostly the same, and then you change one aspect, then I would say you can go ahead and market your book as a retelling. Tell people you retold this story from a feminist perspective. You retold this story from Edward's perspective. You retold this story from the dog's perspective. You retold this story, but it's in 2028. That's not very far from now. You retold this story and it's in 2082. You've got options, but just don't change too much. Otherwise, you may as well change most of it and take the part that you really want to explore. If you really want to explore the aspects of Ariel changing from a mermaid to a person for a man, if you want to explore that, but you have it be something different, like exploring the trans experience where you talk about like a person who identifies as a man, who's attracted to men, and then they decide to be able to get the man that they want. They transition from being a man to a woman. That is a totally different story. But I came up with it because of thinking about mermaid to human. I would never call that a Little Mermaid retelling. Know whether you are going to please or disappoint your audience by saying that it is a retelling. Draw on the nostalgia if it's a retelling, but don't force it if it's just taking a few aspects. So those are my thoughts on the difference between what makes a story a retelling and what makes it a story that took inspiration from another story. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Tell me why. Tell me what you think a retelling is, what you think a story that's inspired by another story is considered. Tell me your favorite retellings. Tell me your favorite stories that are obviously inspired by another story. Let's have a book chat, and I'll see you next time. We've got writer's tips coming out on Tuesdays and story studies on Saturdays, so we can actually chat and pay attention to what makes stories good. Have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time.